The morning had started like any other at Willow Creek Corporate Plaza, the kind of suburban office complex where folks grabbed their coffee from Dunkin', waved hello to the security guard, and hurried inside to beat the morning clock in. The air was cool, touched by that early autumn crisp that made the trees glow orange along the sidewalks. Workers moved in steady streams, but one person walked slower than the rest, Elias Turner, the janitor everyone knew but rarely really saw. Elias was 61, his back a little bent from decades of lifting trash bags and pushing custodial carts across linoleum floors. He wore the same faded navy uniform, stitched at the pocket with the company's initials, and carried a kind of quiet dignity, even if most people never noticed. His hands, rough and scarred, told stories no one bothered to ask about. His eyes, warm but tired, hinted at a past that clung to him, one filled with memories of military service, loss, and a son he hadn't spoken to in years. Every morning, Elias arrived before sunrise, walking through the nearly empty lobby with only the hum of vending machines to keep him company. He liked it that way. Quiet made it easier to breathe. But that morning, something tugged at him, a strange uneasiness he couldn't explain. It was as though the air carried a warning he didn't yet understand. Across the parking lot, a black SUV rolled in, sleek, polished to a mirror shine, and completely out of place among the usual office cars. The vehicle pulled into one of the private spaces near the entrance. People glanced at it with curiosity. It wasn't every day that someone like Nate Harrow, CEO and tech billionaire, visited the building. Nate Harrow was known across the country for his charisma, sharp business mind, and dramatic rise from a garage startup to a billion-dollar empire. But beyond that, he was known for something far more private, his deep grief. His wife, Melissa, had passed 2 years ago from a sudden stroke, and since then, he had become a shadow of the man he once was. Their only child, Grace, had been the light of his world, but even she struggled to reach him anymore. Nate buried himself in work, traveling from city to city, showing up at offices without warning, and drowning his pain in high-rise loneliness. That morning, he had come to Willow Creek to check on a new project his company was integrating into the office systems. He stepped out of the SUV dressed in an immaculate gray suit, though his eyes looked hollow behind stylish glasses. His driver lingered near the car, tapping at a tablet, while Nate scanned the building with a kind of detached weariness. Elias, sweeping leaves near the front door, watched him quietly. He recognized the man, not from magazine covers, but from the sadness he carried. Elias knew what that kind of weight looked like. He'd seen it in the mirror every day since he lost his wife Angela 8 years earlier, and again when his son Marcus cut ties with him after an argument that neither of them had ever healed. "Good morning," Elias offered gently. Nate nodded politely, distracted. "Morning." Inside the building, employees buzzed with nervous excitement. A billionaire wasn't someone they saw every day. Some admired him, others whispered behind their hands, but one thing was clear, everyone paid attention when Nate walked by. Everyone except Elias. He just returned to his work, pushing his cart down the hallway lined with framed motivational posters. Yet that strange tugging sensation lingered. Something in the air felt wrong, electric, tense. Once or twice he paused mid-step, glancing toward the lobby as though expecting something to happen. Around mid-morning, Nate wrapped up a meeting in one of the conference rooms and stepped outside for a moment of fresh air. The sky had grown gray with thick clouds, and a cold wind swept through the parking lot. His driver waved him over. "Sir, we should leave soon," the driver called out. But just as Nate headed toward the black SUV, Elias came out of the building carrying a bag of recyclables. He was walking toward the dumpster on the opposite side when he stopped abruptly. He didn't know why. He just froze, one hand tightening around the bag. Then he saw it. A subtle shift in the SUV's body, too small for anyone else to notice. The vehicle dipped on the passenger side, almost imperceptibly. Elias narrowed his eyes. Years ago, before he became a janitor, he had worked as a military vehicle technician during his service. He knew how machines behaved. He knew when something wasn't right. A noise followed, a faint clicking sound from underneath the SUV. A sound he recognized instantly. His heart lurched. "No," he whispered. That wasn't a normal mechanical tick. That was something fused, armed, waiting. He dropped the bag without thinking. "Hey!" he shouted across the lot. Nate turned, confused. Elias' voice ripped through the wind, raw and urgent. "Don't get in that Sierra." People nearby jumped at the sound. A few froze. Nate blinked, stunned. Elias didn't stop running. His old legs moved faster than they had in decades. His breath tore through his chest as he waved his arms. "Stop. Don't touch the door." Nate's driver frowned, stepping away from the SUV. "What's going on?" Elias pointed frantically at the underside of the vehicle. "Something's wrong with it. Don't move." Nate lifted his hands. "Sir, what are you?" But then Nate saw the look in Elias's eyes. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. A recognition born from someone who had been around danger before. The same kind of look Nate had seen in soldiers he'd met at charity events. The kind of look you didn't ever ignore. Nate slowly stepped back. Okay, I won't." Elias crouched near the side of the SUV, his heart pounding. The clicking had grown louder, more defined. Cold sweat trickled down his neck. "Everyone clear the parking lot," he yelled. "Move away from the car." Security guards rushed out. Employees backed toward the building, whispering nervously. Nate stood still, staring at Elias with a mixture of bewilderment and fear. The janitor swallowed hard. He reached just far enough under the SUV to see the device. A rectangular metal casing wrapped in black tape. Wires. A timer. He gasped. It was a bomb. "Dear Lord," Elias whispered. He stumbled backward, palms shaking. He had seen devices like that during his time in Iraq. Improvised. Brutal. Deadly. The timer ticked down. 0:57, 0:56, 0:55. "Everybody get back," Elias shouted. Nate felt his stomach drop. A bomb. God. Who would? A security guard spoke shakily into his radio. "We need police and bomb squad immediately." Code red. Elias' breath came in shallow bursts. He locked eyes with Nate. "Sir, if you'd gotten inside that car," he shook his head, "you wouldn't have made it." Nate didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat felt made of stone. All he could do was stare at the man who had just saved his life. But Elias wasn't finished. The bomb had been placed right under the fuel tank. He knew what that meant. If it exploded now, the entire lot could go up. Cars, building windows, everyone nearby. He turned to the guards. "We need everyone evacuated now. This isn't small. It's gonna blow big." Nate stepped forward, voice trembling. "Elias, come with us. Get away from it." But Elias shook his head. "If it rolls, if anything shifts, it'll detonate. I need to make sure nobody gets close." "You could die," Nate shouted. For a moment, Elias simply stared at him. His breath steadied. Something settled in his gaze. An old, familiar acceptance. "I've already lived through more than I thought I'd survive," he said quietly. "But those folks inside, they don't have to die today." The timer continued counting down, merciless. His hands trembled as memories crashed into him. His son Marcus laughing while riding his bike, his wife Angela singing while making Sunday pancakes, the day he came home from deployment to find everything broken, the guilt of the past he never forgave himself for. Inside him, something healed in that moment. Maybe he couldn't fix the past, but he could save someone today. He took a deep breath and stood firm near the SUV, ensuring no one got close. Nate couldn't move. He watched the man, watched the shaky courage etched into every inch of him. Sirens wailed in the distance. Security guards hurried people inside. But time was running out. 0:18, 0:17, 0:16. The bomb squad wouldn't make it. Elias' lips trembled. He whispered a prayer under his breath. Behind him, Nate shouted, "Elias! Move!" Elias didn't. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Marcus! I'm sorry, son." The timer blinked. 0:10:0:09:0:08. A moment of silence, sharp, complete, fell over the entire lot. Everyone held their breath. Nate felt his heart shatter. Elias closed his eyes. And then, a sharp metallic pop burst from the device. Not an explosion, but a misfire. The timer glitched. Sparks flew. The countdown froze at 0:07. A second later, the device sputtered and went dark. Smoke hissed beneath the car. Elias gasped, dropping to his knees. Nate ran to him, ignoring the shouting security guards. "Elias! Elias, look at me." Nate grabbed the man's shoulders, shaking him. "Are you okay? Talk to me." Elias coughed, nodding weakly. It didn't go off." Nate pulled him into a trembling embrace. The billionaire, who hadn't cried since his wife died, felt tears slip down his face. "You saved my life," he whispered. "You saved all of us." Elias shook his head faintly. "I just did what anyone would do." But Nate knew better. Most people walk past janitors without seeing them. Most people assume they know someone's worth from the outside. Yet here was a man, overlooked by everyone, who had risked everything for people who barely learned his name. The parking lot filled with police cars, fire trucks, and a bomb squad rushing forward. But Nate held on to Elias, refusing to let go. For the first time in years, Nate felt something break open in his heart, a crack wide enough for gratitude, humanity, and maybe even healing. Elias stared blankly at the ambulance sirens reflecting against the pavement, his breath finally steadying. But Nate. He couldn't stop looking at the man who had yelled, "Don't get in that car." The man who had saved his life. The man he suddenly knew he had to help. The chaos slowly faded as the bomb squad secured the SUV and removed the device, carefully placing it into a thick metal containment box. Employees watched from the building windows, some with hands over their mouths, others whispering about how close they had all come to tragedy. The parking lot that had buzzed with fear was now heavy with a strange, stunned quiet. But in the middle of it all stood Nate Harrow, still holding on to Elias Turner, the janitor who had risked everything to save him. "Elias," Nate repeated softly, helping him sit on the back bumper of the ambulance. "Let the medics check you, please." Elias rubbed his chest, still unsettled by what had happened, but he nodded. "I'm all right. Just shook up." A young EMT named Rachel wrapped a blood pressure cuff around Elias's arm. "You had a massive adrenaline spike," she said gently. "Most folks would have passed out. You sure you're not feeling dizzy?" Elias gave her a tired smile. "Ma'am, I've been through enough to know when I'm about to hit the ground. I'm okay. Promise." Nate stood beside him, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes dark with worry. He had never felt so close to losing everything. His life, his daughter's future, everything he'd worked for. The terror still soaked his bones. "I just keep thinking," Nate murmured. "If you hadn't seen it, if you'd been a minute later." He couldn't finish. Elias lowered his gaze. "I'm just glad I was where I needed to be." Nate shook his head in disbelief. He'd spent billions building security systems, investing in technology, hiring consultants, and yet the one man who saved his life was a janitor making barely enough to keep his lights on. A janitor with eyes full of stories no one had asked about. "Elias," Nate said softly, "how did you even know what that was? How did you recognize the sound?" There was a long, quiet pause. Elias swallowed hard. "Because I've heard it before." Nate didn't push. But Elias saw the question in his eyes, something deeper than curiosity. Something like respect. "I was a mechanic, in the military," Elias finally said. "Spent years overseas. Worked with convoys, and worked on vehicles that got hit. Seen what a hidden device can do. Seen how fast it can take good men away." Nate's breath hitched. "You're a veteran." Elias nodded slowly. Long time ago. Nate was silent for a moment, absorbing that. His throat tightened. I wish someone had told me. Elias laughed quietly, a dry, sad little sound. Nobody ever asks, sir. People see a janitor, not a past. Those words struck Nate harder than the scare he'd just survived. Before he could respond, a detective approached them. Mr. Harrow, he said, flipping open a notepad. We believe the device was professionally made. This wasn't some cheap prank. It was meant for you. Nate stiffened. Do you know who? Not yet, sir. But the placement and the timing suggest someone with knowledge of your schedule. Nate closed his eyes for a moment. He had enemies, business rivals, those who'd lost contracts, people embittered by his success. But hearing it out loud made the danger feel bone deep. We'll assign officers to stay at the building until we gather more information, the detective continued. Thank you, Nate murmured. As the detective walked away, Nate looked back at Elias. The older man was staring into the distance, troubled. Something about the situation clearly pulled at his past, dredging up memories he tried so hard to bury. You okay? Nate asked gently. Elias hesitated. Just thinking of the folks I couldn't save. Nate sat beside him. You saved people today. A beat passed, soft and heavy. Then Nate did something no one expected. He put a hand on Elias's shoulder. Please go home and rest. I'll handle everything here. But Elias shook his head. No, sir. My shift ain't over. I still got the third-floor bathrooms to finish. Nate almost laughed in disbelief. Elias, you nearly died. And still got work to do, Elias replied humbly. I don't leave things undone. Something broke in Nate, something hard and cold inside him. He watched as Elias slowly stood, stiff from adrenaline, and reached for his janitorial cart. No, Nate said firmly. You're not going back to work today. Elias blinked. Sir, I don't want trouble. My supervisor. Your supervisor, Nate interrupted sharply, will answer to me. You're going home. Elias opened his mouth to argue, but Nate stepped closer. You risked your life for me. Let me do this much for you. There was a silence, then Elias finally nodded. All right. Thank you. Nate exhaled, relieved. I'll have my driver take you home. But Elias smiled faintly. I walked here this morning. I'll walk back. Helps clear my head. Nate stared at him, stunned again. Walk? How far do you live? Just a couple miles down Maple Lane, Elias answered. Near the old train tracks. That wasn't just around the corner. That was a full hour walk at best. Elias, Nate whispered. Why is a man like you living like this? Elias hesitated. And for a moment, Nate saw something in the older man, a deep wound, something he kept hidden. Life didn't go the way I planned, Elias finally said, forcing a smile. Made mistakes. Lost people. But I'm still standing. That's enough. But Nate felt those words like a blade. He wanted to ask more. What mistakes? What pain? What was he carrying? But he didn't want to push too hard too fast. Instead, Nate followed him to the edge of the parking lot. They walked in silence, the sky heavy with afternoon clouds. Before Elias went any farther, Nate cleared his throat. Elias, would you allow me to do something for you? Anything. You name it. The older man smiled gently. I don't need anything, sir. Just glad you're all right. Nate swallowed hard. At least let me drive you home. Elias hesitated, pride flickering across his expression. But then he nodded slowly. All right. Thank you. The driver returned with a different company vehicle, and the two men got in. The ride was quiet at first, but Nate couldn't stop glancing at Elias. This man who had saved his life yet still seemed weighted down by 1,000 invisible burdens. When they arrived at Elias's house, a tiny, peeling, one-story rental tucked between two empty lots. Nate's heart sank. The porch was sagging. The roof looked patched with scrap metal. A rusty mailbox leaned to one side. Elias noticed his expression and chuckled. "Ain't pretty, but it's home." Nate stepped out of the vehicle, ignoring the driver's confused look. "I'd like to meet your family," he said. Elias stiffened. "I live alone," he said softly. "Used to live here with my son. He's grown now." Nate sensed the pain behind those words. "Where is he now?" Elias sighed and looked away. "Don't know." A gentle wind rustled fallen leaves around their feet. Nate felt something twist inside him. "What happened?" he asked softly. Elias opened the screen door but didn't step in yet. His hand lingered on the frame. "It's a long story," he murmured. "I've got time," Nate said. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, gathering himself. "Marcus, my boy, he was everything to me. Smart. Kind. He loved drawing cars and airplanes. I raised him alone after Angela died." His voice cracked a little. "I tried so hard, but, when I came home from deployment, I wasn't the same man. Nightmares. Anger. Trouble adjusting." Nate nodded slowly. PTSD. He'd met enough veterans at charity events to understand. "We fought a lot," Elias continued. "I didn't know how to talk to him without raising my voice. He didn't know how to talk to me without pulling away. One day, he just left. Said he'd come back when I learned how to be a better father." Elias swallowed hard. That was 10 years ago. Nate's heart clenched. "Have you tried to find him?" he asked gently. "A few times," Elias whispered. "But I didn't want to push him. He deserves to be happy, even without me." Nate felt a storm build in his chest, an ache he recognized. The kind that comes from the space left by someone you love. "You're not a bad man, Elias," Nate murmured. "I was a broken one," Elias corrected. A long silence settled. Then Nate said something he hadn't planned to say. "My daughter and we're distant too." Elias looked up, surprised. "Grace? The girl I seen in the pictures online." Nate gave him a small, sad smile. "Yeah. She's 14 now. Loves music. Loves drawing. But after her mother died, I buried myself in work. I told myself I was grieving, but really, I was running." Elias nodded knowingly. "Pain makes us do that. We used to cook together on Sundays," Nate continued. "Now she barely speaks to me. I've been trying to fix it, but she doesn't know how much I'm hurting. And I don't know how to tell her." Elias took a breath. "Then tell her you're scared." Nate blinked. "Scared? Kids ain't as soft as folks think," Elias said. "They can handle honesty. What they can't handle is silence that feels like distance." Nate absorbed that deeply. Maybe this man, this quiet janitor, understood more about love and loss than anyone Nate had ever met. They stood in front of Elias's door for a moment longer, the weight of two broken fathers hanging between them. Finally, Elias said, "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Harrow." Nate shook his head. "Nate. Call me Nate." Elias smiled. "Take care of yourself, Nate." As the driver pulled away, Nate looked back through the rear window and watched Elias step slowly inside his small, dimly lit home, a silhouette weighed down by a lifetime of pain yet still standing. Nate pressed a hand to his chest, overwhelmed. He had to help him. Not because Elias saved his life, though he had. Not because of a sense of obligation. But because something about Elias Turner had shifted something inside him, something that had been frozen for years. He couldn't just walk away. Not after what he'd seen. Not after what he now knew. And as the car disappeared down Maple Lane, Nate Harrow made a quiet promise to himself. He would change Elias's life, no matter what it took. Nate Harrow barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the blinking numbers on the bomb timer. He saw Elias standing there, refusing to move, choosing the safety of strangers over his own life. And he saw something else, the loneliness in the older man's eyes as he stepped into that quiet, broken little house. Around 4 a.m., Nate rose from bed, grabbed his laptop, and typed a message to his secretary. Clear my meetings. Find me everything you can on an employee named Elias Turner. By sunrise, he was already in his home office, coffee untouched, scrolling through files. There was no disciplinary record. No complaints. Only years of reliable, unnoticed work. And something else. A note from HR. Employee has rejected multiple raises due to concerns about losing janitorial position during restructuring. Nate closed the laptop. Rejected raises, he whispered. It hit him then. Elias wasn't a man who'd given up on life. He was a man trying to survive without being a burden on anyone. That realization burrowed deep. He thought of Grace, his own daughter, who once told him during a rare argument, "Dad, you care about everyone except the people closest to you." He had pretended it didn't hurt. But it did. Because it was true. Now, he saw the same thing in Elias. A father who still loved a child he'd lost to distance. A man putting everyone else's life before his own. Nate squared his shoulders. Today, he was going to change everything. The visit. By 9 a.m., Nate was already back at Willow Creek Plaza. Workers whispered as he walked past, partly because the bomb squad had been there yesterday, and partly because no one had ever seen the Billionaire 2 days in a row. Nate went straight to the custodial office. Elias wasn't there, his shift started in the evening. But his small metal locker stood in the corner. A dented old thing with a sticker that said, U.S. Army, 1988. Nate touched it, the metal cold beneath his fingers. He turned to a young janitor nearby. When does Elias usually arrive? Around 4, the young man said. He walks here every day. Doesn't like rides. Nate smiled softly. Not today. He checked his watch, nodded, and left the building. At Elias's home. At 3:45 p.m., Nate's car pulled up again on Maple Lane. He knocked gently on the door. A moment later, it opened. Elias stood there, surprised, wearing the same navy uniform, holding his lunch in a small brown paper bag. Nate. Elias blinked. Everything all right? Yes, Nate said. Everything's fine. I'm here for you. Elias frowned. For me? Why? Because, Nate said softly, you saved my life, and I can't let your life keep going the way it has. Elias lowered his gaze. I told you, I don't want charity. This isn't charity, Nate replied. This is respect. And gratitude. And friendship, if you'll allow it. Elias stared at him, stunned. I'm offering you a ride, Nate finally said. Just a ride. Nothing more. After a long pause, Elias nodded slowly. All right. A ride. They walked toward the car. The autumn wind brushed leaves across the cracked pavement. As they drove away, Nate said, There's something I want you to see before your shift. Elias raised an eyebrow. What's that? Nate didn't answer. The new office. The car pulled up at a newly renovated building nearby, a sleek glass structure with a modest sign. Harrow Community Training Center, Veteran Support and Skills Program. Elias read the sign twice, confused. This wasn't here last week. It wasn't open yet, Nate said. But it's been in the works. Today is a special early showing. Nate stepped out and motioned for Elias to follow. Inside, the walls glittered with framed photos of veterans learning trades, sitting in classrooms, laughing together. There were project rooms, computer labs, meeting spaces. Elias walked slowly, disbelief softening his face. This is beautiful, he whispered. But, why are you showing me this? Nate walked beside him. Because I want you to run the mechanical training program here. Elias stumbled a little, inhaling sharply. Me? Run it. Nate, I'm a janitor. No, Nate said firmly. You're a mechanic. A soldier. A man who kept people alive. A man who recognized a bomb by sound alone. Elias closed his eyes, breath trembling. I haven't worked on vehicles in years. And yet, Nate said softly, you saved an entire building yesterday with that knowledge. Elias was silent, his eyes glistening. This facility, Nate continued, needs someone who understands young men and women coming back from service. Someone patient. Someone wise. Someone who knows what heartbreak feels like. He stepped closer. Someone like you. Elias swallowed, voice cracking. I don't know if I deserve something like this. You deserve more than this, Nate said. But let's start here. Elias wiped at his eyes and whispered, thank you. The truth about Marcus. Hours later, after a tour and quiet moments of disbelief, Nate drove Elias back to Willow Creek Plaza for his shift. But as they sat in the parking lot, Elias suddenly spoke. Nate, there's something I need to tell you. He took a deep breath. Yesterday, when I thought I was gonna die, I kept thinking about my son, Marcus. Nate listened carefully. I kept thinking about how I never got to say I was sorry. How I never showed him I changed. How I would have died before he ever knew. Tears lined Elias's eyes. That man who left 10 years ago. I ain't him no more. But Marcus don't know that. Nate put a hand on his shoulder. Then let me help you find him. Elias's breath hitched. I wouldn't even know where to start. Nate smiled gently. I already started. Elias looked up, stunned. Nate reached into the console and handed him a folded sheet of paper. Elias opened it with shaking hands. It was a printout of a social media page. A young man, Marcus Turner, standing beside a bright mural he'd painted, smiling wide, holding a paintbrush. A caption read, to the father who made me strong even when life was heavy, I hope you're doing okay out there. Elias choked on a sob. Nate said quietly, he's an art teacher now. Lives 2 towns over. Elias pressed a trembling hand over his mouth. He talked about me. All the time. Nate's voice softened. He never hated you, Elias. He left because he wanted you to heal. But he never stopped loving you. Elias bent forward, shaking as tears spilled down his cheeks. Decades of pain, guilt, memories, it all rushed out. Nate gently helped him sit back. Call him, Nate said. Or, I can drive you to him tonight. Elias wiped his face but shook his head. No, not tonight. Nate nodded respectfully. Tomorrow, Elias whispered. Tomorrow. I want to go tomorrow. Nate smiled. I'll take you. The next day. The next afternoon, Elias stood outside his house wearing his cleanest shirt, hands shaking like a teenager preparing for his first interview. When Nate arrived, he could tell the older man had slept little. You ready? Nate asked softly. No, Elias whispered. But let's go anyway. The drive was quiet but warm. Elias stared out the window, clutching a small envelope in his hand. What's that? Nate asked gently. A letter, Elias murmured. Been writing it for years. Kept rewriting it. I want to give it to him. Nate nodded. He'll be grateful for it. When they reached the small art school, Elias froze at the door. I don't know what to say, he whispered. What if he turns me away? Nate stepped beside him. Then I'll wait right here, he said. But I don't think he will. Elias took a trembling breath and walked inside. The reunion. Marcus Turner was cleaning brushes in a classroom when he heard the door open. He looked up and froze. The paintbrush fell from his hand. Dad, he whispered. Elias stopped 2 steps inside, tears already falling. Hey, son. Marcus approached slowly, breathing hard. Is it really you? Elias nodded. Yeah, it's me. I'm so sorry. Marcus's face crumpled. For what? He whispered. For everything. For yelling. For being angry. For not being the man you needed. For not finding you sooner. Marcus grabbed him before he could say another word. They held each other the way a father and son do when 10 years of silence finally breaks. Tight, shaking, crying like children. I missed you, Marcus sobbed. I missed you more, Elias choked. Through the window, Nate watched with a tight throat. He had seen business victories, launches, awards. But nothing compared to this. Elias and Marcus sat together for nearly an hour, talking through broken memories and fresh hopes. At one point, Marcus brought out drawings he'd saved, sketches of vehicles, engines, and childhood doodles. I kept drawing because of you, Marcus said softly. You made me love building things. Elias pressed his forehead into his hands, overwhelmed. I'm so proud of you. Marcus smiled through tears. I'm proud of you too, Dad.